This is actually one of the reasons I agreed to do this, is I really want to hear the next speaker. Laura Adelson, Chief Technology Officer, Civil Rights Division. So I'm looking, she'll do another one of our lightning round talks. We'll have a couple, then we'll have a keynote and another lightning round, and then the final panel. So I know I'm losing my voice. Laura, do you want to come up? Thanks.
Hey folks, the brownies were good, right? I thought so. Okay, so just gonna wait for like the 2 more people to come in. Well, first of all, thank you, Jim, and thanks to the Center for Strategic and International Studies for bringing us all together today. I know that the Justice Department and frankly, agencies across the federal government have been working really hard to make sure that we are keeping up with changing technology. And I really appreciate the opportunity to learn more about how other folks across the department are thinking about this problem. And also to share a little bit about how the Civil Rights Division is adapting to the demands that new AI-driven systems present. So specifically, today I am going to talk about the strategic approaches that we are taking to our AI enforcement work. Before I do that though, I also want to talk a little bit about our priors, why we are working so hard to enforce the law in these new technological arenas, and why we think that doing that may require adapting our practical strategies. So as all federal agencies do, we have responsibilities laid out in last year's AI executive order, of course, but more fundamentally, all of us at the Justice Department believe in the principle that no one is above the law. And that has to mean that no algorithm, no model, no AI system is either. However, there are some very real differences in how algorithmic and AI systems function when compared to how human-driven systems function and are employed. So it's those process differences that mean that even though all the statutes that we are charged with enforcing apply equally to AI systems, some of our enforcement strategies that are extremely effective today may not be as effective in a future where more and more aspects of American life are mediated by AI systems. So, given all that, the question that I want to address is, given that the mission of the Civil Rights Division is to uphold the civil and constitutional rights of all Americans, particularly the most vulnerable, how are we adapting our enforcement strategies to that future? So, first of all, we believe that some of our existing enforcement strategies will remain the best ones. At the Civil Rights Division, one of our most important resources as an enforcement agency has always been the public. If someone suspects that they have been the victim of illegal discrimination, even if that discrimination was via an AI or other technological system, we want them to go to our complaint portal at civilrights.justice.gov and file a report. Of course, one of the problems posed by black box AI systems is that it's often not clear why they make the decisions that they do. And that can make our job as law enforcers challenging, to say the least. But our complaint portal has never been just for victims of illegal discrimination. We also want to hear from whistleblowers. If someone believes that an AI model or another algorithm that they have worked on is acting in a way that violates people's civil rights, our investigators want to hear from them. Given the lack of public transparency around how some AI models function, in some cases it is system designers who may be in the best position to discover and document illegal discrimination. Our door is wide open to those people. Second, we believe that independent research into AI systems and algorithms has been really vital to our enforcement program and will continue to grow in importance. As a computer scientist myself, this one is really near and dear to my heart because I believe that independent AI bias research has a really important role to play in validating the fairness and non-discriminatory nature of AI systems for the public. But it is also really valuable for creating signal to law enforcement when researchers discover evidence that systems that they are studying may be illegally discriminatory. So an example of this is the fact that independent research was really key to bringing to light illegally discriminatory delivery of housing ads on Meta platforms just a couple of years ago. So this is our message to AI bias researchers. If in the course of your work you find evidence that a system that you are studying is engaged in illegal discrimination, we also want you to come forward with that evidence. Independent researchers can also file reports at civilrights.justice.gov, and we will be following the lead of our colleagues and partners at the Federal Trade Commission and the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau in increasing our engagement with the research community so that folks in that community know better how to do that. So third, we believe that because of the larger footprint of AI systems, collaborations on the part of law enforcers are going to become even more vital as time goes on. Already today, we partner with and support other agencies, including state and local entities, on many investigations and other activities where we have overlapping jurisdiction. Last year, the Civil Rights Division, the CFPB, the FTC, and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission published a joint statement outlining our enforcement efforts against discrimination in automated systems. And several agencies have since signed on to that joint statement as well. We expect to have an increasing number of these ongoing collaborations as AI systems come into wider use and the number of AI-related investigations grows. Fortunately, collaboration is a real area of strength for the Civil Rights Division. We have a long history of working with agencies, not only across the federal government, but also with state, local, and tribal governments on a wide range of activities. Just to give one example of how we're starting to do this, we recently collaborated with some of these other entities to train our attorneys and litigation staff on the nuts and bolts of how AI systems and other related technologies are designed and deployed. And it's this history of collaboration that's a cornerstone of why one of our responsibilities outlined in the AI Executive Order is this coordination and support of agencies' enforcement of federal laws to address civil rights and civil liberty violations and discrimination related to AI. So keeping up with technological change means building with the future in mind. And that is exactly what we are hoping to do with all of these strategies. But in order to be effective, we need to skate to where the puck is going, so to speak. And as we do that, the Civil Rights Division will also need to maintain and even improve our capacity to manage our existing caseload of non-tech and non-AI related discrimination. This is because even as the pace of development of AI is absolutely blistering, the actual rate of adoption can be very slow. And we do think that there are a lot of opportunities here. In particular, we think that finding ways to use technology to help investigators wade through really large volumes of evidence and more complex types of evidence using new analytical tools will be absolutely critical to AI-related investigations. But it's also going to be really, really helpful for non-AI related cases as well. So, as I said at the beginning, the Civil Rights Division, we are not alone in confronting these questions of strategy. I've really enjoyed hearing from other folks across the department about how they are adapting to our changing operating environment, and I expect that our approach will continue to evolve. The statutes that we are tasked with enforcing, they are not specific to a medium or a technology. They aim to ensure that all Americans have equal access to the key components of the American dream, like housing, employment, education opportunities, and fair policing. This means that our approach to investigations and enforcement will always have to evolve. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing more from others about how they are confronting these questions.
Great. If Thomas Schneider is around, oh, there we are. Great. So our next keynote is by Thomas Schneider, who's the chair of the Committee on Artificial Intelligence with the Council of Europe. He'll be followed by Yoon-Young Choi, Deputy Assistant Attorney General of the National Security Division. But we'll get to see Thomas again. So, thanks. Good seeing you. Good to see you.
Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure for me to be here. As a Swiss civil servant, it's always interesting to see how other countries that are similar but different in many ways discuss the same issues like we do. I'm going to talk to you for a few minutes about the Council of Europe Convention, but trying to embed it also in some of the things that already have been discussed this morning. So as we've already heard this morning, AI is not the first disruptive technology that mankind will need to learn to deal with and cope with. In the Industrial Revolution, we had engines that replaced physical labor of human beings, of animals. They were put in machine to process raw materials, produce goods, produce food, and they were put in machines, vehicles to move things or people from A to B. Now with the digital revolution, we have AI not replacing physical human labor, but cognitive human labor, mainly through generating content that has been produced previously only by people, and to analyze data in a way that decisions can be prepared or taken automatically. In both cases, there's very many similarities. In both cases, the risks and impacts are very much context-based, and it may merit to look at how we dealt with engine risks and impacts in the past to also get some inspiration on how to deal with risks of AI. And if we look at how we deal with engines, there is no single one engine law or one engine convention. Actually, there are thousands of technical, legal, and socio-cultural norms that deal with aspects, potential risks and impacts of engines in different contexts. And most of these norms are actually not about the engines themselves. They are about the vehicles that are driven by the engines. They are about the infrastructure that is used by the vehicles or by the machines. They are about the people that control or manipulate the machines. They are about people that may be affected by these machines. And there are different degrees of international harmonization depending on the context. If you look at air traffic and car traffic, of course, air traffic, for obvious reasons, is much more internationally harmonized than cars that may drive on different sides of the roads in different countries and so on and so forth. And we think that the same is already about to happen when it comes to AI. We will not just have one law, one size-fits-all solutions. We'll have to have thousands of, and we've heard already about NIST and other standardization institutions this morning. We'll have to have thousands of technical norms, of legal norms, binding, non-binding, sectoral, horizontal ones, and also social cultural norms, because an institutional, historical culture may have different ways of dealing with risks, of tasking people themselves to deal with risk or deferring responsibilities to the state and so on and so forth. So we already see such an ecosystem emerging, and the Council of Europe Convention is only one instrument. It's, we hope, going to be an important instrument, but it's only one instrument in this ecosystem of instruments that should allow us to more or less successfully cope with AI. The purposes of the convention are basically two. One is, given the mandate of the Council of Europe, to make sure that the existing protection levels of human rights, democracy, and rule of law are maintained also when it comes to AI. And the other one, which is, and they are the same all over the world when you hear about purposes of instruments, it's to be conducive to innovation. We've heard a lot about trust this morning, and of course, that's also one of the hopes that this convention will lead to increased trust in AI through certain obligations that are there. So And another important element, the Council of Europe, by the way, for those that are not so familiar with European institutions, has got nothing to do with the European Union. The Council of Europe has 46 member states, including mine, Switzerland, which is not a member of the EU. It's older than the European Union. It's like the UN of Europe, but it has a unique feature. It has defined positive obligations. There is a European Convention on Human Rights where states are obliged to follow decisions of the courts and modify their laws accordingly if a court decision asks them to. So this is the special feature of the Council of Europe. At the same time, there was a consensus among the Council of Europe, 46 members, that we should not develop a European-only treaty, because we may think we were super important, but there's countries and leading AI countries around the world that are not part of Europe. So there was a consensus that we should try and develop something that can have a global reach, at least among those countries, and that reduces the scope slightly, that have similar protection levels of human rights, democracy, and rule of law. So not every country may fulfill that requirement. We had all the G7 countries negotiate, part of the negotiations from the beginning. In the course of negotiations, we had a number of Latin American countries joining and other countries, including Australia. Israel, one of the leading AI developing nations, has also been part of this. A challenge was that we tried to create an instrument that should be a little bit future-proof, i.e. technologically, not go too much into detail, to hold for 10 or 20 or 30 years in terms of the principles. So we had to remain on a certain abstraction level of the principles that we would work on. So what the convention now basically says is that states have general obligations to safeguard existing protection levels, again, of human rights, democracy, and rule of law, the integrity of democratic processes, the respect of rule of law. These are very vague concepts and differ even in Europe from country to country. You may have different notions about how democracy is supposed to work, but still there's a commitment for states to protect these processes. And it also stated that, as we've heard already also this morning, AI systems are not operated in a legal vacuum. You have existing regulatory frameworks that apply basically to AI, like human rights law in general. So there's no legal void, but there are gaps that we may need to fill. Things need to be clarified, maybe mechanisms need to be developed in order to make sure that actually these fundamental principles and values and the institutions and the instruments apply to AI. One of the key approaches that also everyone agreed was that we should follow a graduated and differentiated approach to taking any measures, any state interference when it comes to AI, so that the measures should be, we call it proportionate in Europe. That I learned that this is not the word to be used in this country for several reasons. That the measure should be in line with the severity and the probability of adverse impact. And the core of the convention is basically that there are a number of general principles that are established that are important in relationship to AI. Things like human dignity and individual autonomy, transparency and oversight, accountability and responsibility, equality or equity, but it's called now equality in the convention, and non-discrimination, privacy and personal data protection, reliability, and one principle called safe innovation. I don't have the time to go into this, but it's quite an interesting one. And another important element is, given that we have a right to remedies, we have a right to fair trial, that maybe there new mechanisms are needed in the context of AI to actually make sure that you can file a complaint. You need to have an authority where you can file a complaint or ask for redress. You need to have an obligation for relevant actors to document some relevant information that allows you to actually assess what an AI system is doing, or if it's done something wrong. And this information should be sufficient that you can actually contest a decision. And also in line with this, there's an obligation for signatories to the convention that you have in place mechanisms or a mechanism to assess risks and impacts in a way that actually allow you to take adequate, proportionate, whatever you call it, measures, in the sense that where there's no risk to human rights, democracy, and rule of law, there's nothing to do. Where there's a low risk, there may be few things to do. Where there's higher risks, that may require more action. So this is the core of the convention. We are currently working, in addition to the convention, on something that we call a methodology for a hood area, which is a human rights, democracy, rule of law, impact, risk and impact assessment tool, which is a non-binding instrument that should give guidance to all those interested on how to develop such an assessment system that is actually able to do the job. And we hope also that this may help to increasing the interoperability of our different ways of dealing with similar issues or similar challenges, that this would help also in cooperation with the technical standard bodies that are cooperating. OECD and others are also there, so that we may not fully harmonize our systems, our regulatory mechanisms, but that they are at least interoperable in a way that it's good, not just for us as government people who have somehow to deal with this, but also that it's easier for the industry and for consumers and citizens to actually use AI. So much for me for the time being. We may go into further details during the panel later. Thank you very much.
I'm not used to such disciplined speakers. I mean, everyone's staying on schedule. It's like, so our next speaker is here. They're in the green room, and hopefully they'll come out in a minute. It's Yoon-Young Choi, Deputy Assistant Attorney General, National Security Division. Oh, it actually worked. Come on up. That's your cue.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, that was.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for that introduction that I walked into in the middle. And to our partners at CSIS for hosting us today. My name is Yoon-Young Choi, and I serve as the Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the National Security Division. And I'm grateful to have this opportunity to tell you a bit about our work in the National Security Division as it relates to artificial intelligence. As a longtime prosecutor at the Justice Department who has spent most of my career working on issues related to cyber, I've seen firsthand the transformative effect that new and emerging technologies have had, not only on society as a whole, but also on the work of the department in upholding the rule of law and keeping our country safe. We at the department understand the incredible potential that emerging technologies like AI hold to enhance our capabilities in fulfilling our mission. But in embracing the potential for AI, it is important that we use it in a manner that is ethical, responsible, and safe. To that end, I serve as the National Security Division's representative to the department's Emerging Technology Board, which works to coordinate and govern the use of AI and other emerging technologies across the department so that we are prepared for the opportunities and the challenges that new technologies present. The Justice Department is also witnessing the implications of AI when in the hands of malicious actors who put our safety at risk. I'd like to spend a little bit of time today explaining in particular what we're seeing from NSD's perspective. At NSD, I'm responsible for overseeing the department's efforts to combat and disrupt a variety of threats to our national security. These include foreign adversaries attempting to illegally acquire and siphon away cutting-edge technology and the components that comprise them from US manufacturers and companies. Foreign agents engaging in espionage to steal not only our military secrets, but also our trade secrets in an effort to erode our economic competitiveness. Malign foreign actors who work covertly to spread narratives designed to sow discord, undermine confidence in our democratic institutions, and influence our elections. Cyber attacks by nation-state actors targeting US businesses and critical infrastructure. Efforts by authoritarian regimes to project power by intimidating and silencing dissidents, journalists, and diaspora communities in the United States. And the collection of Americans' personal data by our adversaries to gain insights to fuel all of these malicious activities or to identify other avenues to potentially gain strategic advantage over the United States. From NSD's perspective, artificial intelligence is having significant and profound implications for our collective security across each of these threat vectors. Put simply, AI in the hands of those who seek to exploit its technological promise for malign ends works as an accelerant across every single one of these threats and has the potential to enhance the speed, scale, and consequence of malicious activity that places our national security at risk. At NSD, our mission is to use our legal authorities and tools to counter the threats we face from all cutting-edge technologies, including AI. And we're drawing on our past experiences in responding to a dynamic and constantly evolving threat landscape to help position ourselves to combat the threats we're seeing in the present day and the threats that may come. So let me highlight a few ways NSD is confronting the risks posed by AI. Last year, we partnered with the Department of Commerce to create the Disruptive Technology Strike Force. The Strike Force brings together 5 federal law enforcement agencies to focus on stopping the flow of sensitive, advanced technology to our foreign adversaries. We created interagency enforcement teams comprised of federal prosecutors and agents located in 17 locations across the country, including cities with substantial tech sector presence, as well as significant commercial ports. These enforcement teams are charged with investigating illicit procurement networks and other transfers of cutting-edge technology in violation of US law. Protecting AI is at the very top of the Strike Force's priority list. After all, as our Deputy Attorney General, Lisa Monaco, has observed, AI is the ultimate disruptive technology. And to date, the Strike Force is producing tangible results. Since its inception, we have charged 24 cases involving the transfer or attempted transfer of sensitive technology to actors connected to China, Russia, and Iran. This is nearly triple the number from the 2-year period before the Strike Force was created. These cases involve several enforcement actions that disrupted the illegal transfer of microelectronics and semiconductors to our foreign adversaries in contravention of our export control and sanctions laws. These types of electronics are not only key components for a variety of technologies used on the battlefield, but also necessary to build AI systems. But in addition to combating the illegal flow of hardware, the Strike Force has also disrupted efforts to steal knowledge on how to build AI systems from our companies that are the engines of US leadership in the AI and machine learning space. For instance, in March of this year, the Strike Force's efforts led to the arrest of a Google software engineer who is accused of stealing more than 500 confidential files about AI technology, proprietary information of the hardware infrastructure and software platforms used in Google's advanced supercomputing data centers. At the same time, the former employee was stealing this information. He's accused of secretly working with 2 China-based tech companies, including an AI-focused company that he himself founded. When it comes to foreign malign influence to impact our public discourse and interfere with our elections, we have seen advances in generative AI facilitating foreign adversaries in their efforts to increase the scale and scope of their influence operations. As the Office of the Director of the National Intelligence recently stated in its election security update, the IC is observing foreign actors, including Russia and Iran, use generative AI to boost their respective US election influence efforts and helping to improve and accelerate aspects of foreign influence operations. 2 recent enforcement actions highlight how Russia is already harnessing AI for its own ends and how we are rising to the occasion. In July, with our federal, international, and private sector partners, we announced the disruption of an AI-enhanced social media bot farm that had been developed and operated by the Russian government and designed to disseminate disinformation to sow discord in the United States and elsewhere. The bot farm used elements of AI to create fictitious social media profiles, often purporting to belong to individuals located in the United States. And just last month, we also announced a court-approved operation to seize 32 internet domains used by the Russian government and its proxies to engage in a covert campaign referred to as doppelganger, to interfere in and influence the outcome of our upcoming election. The affidavit supporting the takedown details how Putin's inner circle directed Russian public relations companies to promote disinformation and state-sponsored narratives as part of this effort, and includes an internal planning document straight from the Kremlin that makes plain that a goal of the campaign was to secure Russia's preferred outcome in the election. The online infrastructure used by the doppelganger campaign include websites designed to appear to American readers as US news sites such as the Washington Post or Fox News. But in reality, those were fake sites filled with Russian propaganda. In both of those examples, the Russian government leveraged artificial intelligence tools to promote messages to undermine international support for Ukraine and bolster their pro-Russian interests, and in the case of doppelganger, to influence voters in the US and across the world. When it comes to cyber, AI has the potential to enable malicious cyber actors to leverage capabilities that are powerful, scalable, and easier to develop. Put simply, AI lowers the barriers to entry and can enable malign actors to conduct not only foreign malign influence operations, such as those that I just mentioned, but also to improve upon spear phishing campaigns or cyber intrusion tactics that rely on fabricated personas and other deceptions. Efforts to trick victims to steal and harvest their credentials through the use of social engineering, fictitious personas, and spear phishing are among the most commonly deployed techniques we see for cyber campaigns of all kinds, including, for example, Iran's hack and leak operation to target the email accounts of current and former American public officials, journalists, and more recently, individuals associated with the campaign of former President Trump, for which we announced charges just last week. We know that cyber actors will continue to leverage improvements of AI to enhance their own capabilities, and we will remain vigilant in using our tools and authorities and working with our public and private sector partners here and abroad and with CSIS to disrupt their malicious campaigns. But NSD's work in preventing countries of concern from acquiring AI capabilities is not limited to our enforcement and disruption actions. NSA also plays a crucial role in protecting American data and technology through its interagency efforts as a member of the Committee of Foreign Investment in the United States. Through our review of foreign acquisitions of and investments in U.S. companies, we assess, mitigate, and prevent national security risks posed by those transactions before they can materialize. That includes ensuring that our foreign adversaries are not utilizing investments in our economy to obtain sensitive U.S. technology such as artificial intelligence and high-quality data sets that feed AI algorithms. When NSC reviews these transactions, we consider whether the U.S. business has access to any kind of data about individuals that may be valuable to a foreign adversary due to its nature and volume. For example, if the data provides insights into patterns of life or daily habits, or into particular populations such as members of the military or U.S. government. In partnership with our interagency counterparts in the intelligence community, we also consider the type and degree of access to sensitive technology and know-how that the proposed transaction would allow, and whether that access would advance our adversaries' strategic capabilities and, in turn, harm our national security. Finally, we are leading the charge in closing the gaps of our legal authorities that can be exploited by our adversaries to advance their AI capabilities. Our adversaries can rely on advanced technologies like AI to analyze and manipulate bulk, sensitive personal data for a range of malicious activity, including for surveillance, coercion, blackmail, and espionage. Countries of concern can use access to bulk data to help fuel the creation and refinement of AI and other advanced technologies, improving their capacity to exploit the underlying data and exacerbating the national security threats posed by their access to these technologies. As a U.S. government, we have long devoted extensive resources to prevent adversaries from illegally obtaining sensitive data through a variety of means, including through cyber espionage and insider threats. But for years, there was no law that barred adversaries from simply purchasing the bulk data from brokers and others. That changed this past February when the President signed a groundbreaking executive order giving the Justice Department targeted new authority to prohibit and restrict foreign adversaries from acquiring Americans' most sensitive personal data. NSD has been delegated primary responsibility for enforcing this new regulatory program, which protects several categories of sensitive data about Americans: fingerprints and keyboard usage patterns, geolocation information, personal identifiers, and personal health and financial data. And we are presently moving through the final stages of the rulemaking process. To be sure, we recognize the great potential of responsible and principled use of artificial intelligence. But where our adversaries and other malign actors seek to use this technology to engage in conduct that threatens our national security, NSD will remain vigilant to use all of the tools and resources and partnerships at our disposal to counter all of those threats. Thank you for your time today.
Well, on the schedule, we have a break, but I think I will skip it and ask the next panel to come on up. And if you need a break, now would be a good time, but we'll... Where is the panel? Yeah, are we all, you guys are all set? Ready? All set? Come on up. I guess it's come on down. Thanks. Well, I hope you enjoyed your break. Let's get started again. Oh, come on up. Don't wait for a written invitation. Come on up. Great. Well, thank you for being a patient audience. I think this panel is another one we've been looking forward to because it's the international panel. But with that, let me turn it over to Ryan. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan Harper. I'm an attorney in the Computer Crime and Intellectual Property section. And I've had the distinct pleasure of working with many of the people on this panel on AI issues over the last few years. We have Ambassador Schneider, who we heard from recently. As you heard, he chaired the convention on AI that the Council of Europe just finalized and signed in September. Congratulations again. We have Elizabeth Amory from the State Department's Legal Advisor's Office. She was the head of delegation for the AI convention process. She also covers a number of other issues for the department. She's currently in the Human Rights and Refugee Law section. She focuses on freedom of expression, association, peaceful assembly, human rights and privacy, and human rights and technology, among other things. And in former lives has been at the NSC and members of delegations to many different UN bodies. We have Professor Andrew Imbray, who hopefully some of you have read his wonderful book, The New Fire, War, Peace, and Democracy in the Age of AI. He is the Associate Professor of the Practice in the Gracias Chair in Security and Emerging Technology at the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. And he's previously served as a senior advisor on cyber and emerging technology policy to the U.S. ambassador, the U.S. mission to the United Nations. And last, but very much not least, we have Ben Rosen, who is Associate General Counsel of AI Policy and Regulation at OpenAI, where he leads the AI governance and policy initiatives for the legal team, advising on the EU Act, which you've all heard about earlier today, the executive order on AI, regulation of frontier models, and a number of consumer protection and AI safety issues, and he's formerly of the FTC. So we have a very strong panel with a number of different perspectives. Our hope here is to widen the lens a little bit after a long day. Thank you all for staying with us. And consider a bit more what the rest of the world is doing with AI. So just as we have domestically, there's a wide range of processes going on at the global level to set some expectations around government use of AI and its development, including the recent signature of the Council of Europe's framework. There's also a number of other domestic and regional approaches to AI use and regulation that differ from the approach here in the United States, in some key ways that can impact our ability to work with our partners or develop our technologies. So to start, I'm interested to hear how each of your perspectives might differ or be the same on the value of international engagement on government use of AI given the stage of the technology's development. Are all these processes making a difference? And I'll let you start, Thomas.
Well, whether they make a difference or not, they are necessary, I think, for the very simple reason to start with, because we're dealing with globalized markets, with globalized uses and production chains of technology that no country can just look at itself. Of course, there are some that are more powerful, more impactful than others, but in the end, there needs to be some cooperation in order to have some interoperability, like I said before, of measures, of solutions, of standards. Otherwise, it won't work. And the other thing is also the topic is life is getting more and more complex. Everything is dependent, interdependent with everything. And for instance, for smaller countries like mine, we simply don't have the resources to analyze everything in detail and so on, and other countries from other continents. So you basically need to cooperate with each other also to share the burden, to understand, develop ideas, test them, find solutions. Yeah.
Elizabeth, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would agree with definitely what Thomas has said. We all, I think, understand it's a global technology with a global impact. and how any particular country, any particular region chooses to use, design, govern AI is going to have an impact way beyond its borders. And also, as Thomas mentioned, the opportunity there for cooperation and for, working together, not just for looking at the risks, but also kind of looking at the opportunities for positive developments that governments and others can derive from this technology. So I think that the diversity of conversations that are going on are good and necessary. And the fact that they are happening at this multilateral level at the same time that they're happening domestically is an interesting situation to be in. It definitely was for us negotiating this convention. But I think it is a positive, it is a strength. I will say up front, I was a little bit, I was one of the skeptics when the Council of Europe came forward and said that they were going to negotiate the first legally binding instrument in this space, given the fact that at that point, no country or region in the world had really decided yet how they were going to govern or regulate AI, or if they were going to. But I will give them a lot of credit for being at the forefront of that. And I think that those conversations we've had over the last 2 years in that space were informed by the conversations elsewhere going on multilaterally in terms of non-binding instruments and efforts, and also domestically. And I think all of those conversations happening at different levels in different fora are all mutually reinforcing and will help us to hopefully stay apace with this emerging technology.
I think that's helpful. I'm curious, Andrew, I mean, we've talked a little bit about the convention, but for those who maybe are not following the international sphere, there are a range of processes going on that are setting a series of kind of voluntary standards and high-level frameworks for how to approach some of the risks, often at, again, the human rights level or democracy level, but sometimes more in safety spaces. Do you see any of them being particularly effective, or some of them that you might have quibbles with?
Yeah, I actually think this builds up nicely from the two previous points, because if you think about the dimensions of change that governments have to navigate in terms of the use of AI, obviously safety is a critical dimension of that, but just the sheer rate of change is in some cases bewildering, and it's hard to keep track of. If you think about one data point recently, look at the compute that's being applied to some of these models, and by one estimate, something like we're looking at training runs 10,000x larger than some of the biggest models today by 2030. A lot of these trends have bottlenecks, and there's whole debates around whether they can continue. But if they do, we're looking at continuous rates of change that are hard for some of the governments to get their arms around. And this is tough because the clock speeds of the technology, of tech policy, don't always work in tandem. So if I had to sort of frame some of this, I would say first, governments need eyes on the ball. They need insight into what's going on. And the science of model evaluation is nascent. It's immature, but developing. We now have AI safety institutes around the world. We have collaboration agreements among them. That is great. I think governments could do a lot more to build on that, right? Leveraging tools like prize competitions and infrastructure support for model development and the ecosystems around them to ensure that we're sharing insights and visibility as this progresses. Because if you want scalable oversight as the models grow and become more sophisticated, and balancing that with innovation needs and the needs of human rights, I think you do need insight. You need eyes on the ball. The other is, I would just point out the sheer magnitude of change is also really interesting. If you think about when Thomas Edison got the patent for the light bulb and when electricity lit up half of US homes, it's a 45-year period. So diffusion matters just as much as moments of invention. And when governments think about use of AI, that means they also have to shift the frame of reference to the kinds of metrics they track, the kinds of policies that would support foundational skills development and our workforce. And they need to think about comparative advantage, because I think diffusion works a little differently. Countries that might be struggling today, governments that might be struggling today to nurture innovation advantage may have a critical advantage on diffusion down the road. And the last thing I just say, when you think about, who's driving the innovation, a lot of the work in industry, and how do we sort of predict where it's going? I think it's incredibly useful for governments to leverage open source data to have scalable sort of horizon scanning of the global S&T framework. This is really important because otherwise we kind of don't know where these developments are leading. We don't know where they can go, so we need data-informed and anticipatory developments. I'm starting to see that. I think there's a lot of good models happening in the private sector and industry, but governments have public benefit needs. They have to look out for the public interest. So I think more and more of this kind of open source data analytics as a capability that governments can leverage and share with each other will be really important as they use the technology, as they hire great, talented people to work on it, as they think about regulation and oversight, and as they buy the technology and have to think about test and evaluation, all the sorts of things that we're focused on to make sure we can innovate responsibly.
Ben, do you see these international processes making a difference on the development side?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I absolutely do. I mean, I think, international parties have been more engaged on AI at an early level. I think you saw that at Bletchley Park and the summit that followed up in Seoul. Both very focused on the risks of frontier AI development. And I think both of those have led to some important agreements. I mean, both the G7 Hiroshima process, as well as the Seoul commitments on frontier model security, I think lay out a pretty useful kind of baseline for how frontier model labs in particular should be thinking about safety that ties to having a framework in place to evaluate and measure frontier risks, to be able to track it and mitigate it and have a process in place so that you're deploying safely as the technology continues to advance. I think I agree with a ton of the stuff that we've already discussed. The pace of change is incredible, right? And I think for governments to keep up with the pace of change is going to be a huge challenge that's going to require capacity building, both domestically, but also globally, just given the effects of the tech. I know there's one view, at least within OpenAI, and I've heard this from other sort of leading folks in the AI space, that the pace of change that's likely to happen in the next 10, 15, 20 years is very likely to outpace, the total pace of change that we've seen in human society over the last several thousand, right? That the potential for that kind of rapid exponential change is very real. And the amount of capacity building that needs to happen, it's important that it starts now and starts early. The developments with the AI Safety Institutes, I think, is a really important step forward, especially starting to see a global network of ACEs. We're very proud to have reached an agreement with both the US AI Safety Institute and the UK to allow them to conduct some analyses on our models to help further the science of evaluations. We were able to do that with the O1 preview that we were announced a couple weeks ago, and hope to be able to continue that work because the science of evaluations really is quite nascent. It is evolving rapidly, but it is an area right now where there are not really clear standards from one lab to another, so that it's very hard, I think, to do kind of like apples to apples comparisons of the different models. And the work that the ACEs are doing, both in combination with things like NIST and CENELAC and some of the other ML Commons and other standards making bodies, is so important to setting the stage for a safe and harmonized development process as these models continue to advance.
I'm going to jump on that point about harmonized, because I think one of the things I'm hearing from a lot of you is the importance of international collaboration and cooperation, but there are fault lines. There are spaces in which countries are taking different tacks towards AI development, towards regulation, towards government use, and human rights and applications. So maybe I'll start with you, Elizabeth, where you've seen some of the UN conversations. What are those fault lines? How do we deal with them when we're trying to make sure that this is a responsibly developed technology?
Sure. I think coming from my perspective as an attorney who advises on international law, one of the early kind of fault lines we saw, and this came up when the US was leading the negotiations at the UN on the first UN General Assembly resolution on AI, was just very basically the idea of, or the question of, for some it was a question, does existing international law generally, does international human rights law specifically already govern the design, the development, the use of these emerging technologies in general, but AI specifically? And so from our perspective, it was very much an affirmative yes, of course. these same rules apply, and particularly in the human rights space, regardless of the technology that a government may be using, their same human rights obligations apply. But that was a very real conversation that came up in that negotiation about what language would go into a resolution about the applicability of international law in general and human rights law specifically. And so while I think there's a lot of commonality, and we kind of, I think, heard that today throughout, there are some general threads in at least the multilateral level in terms of the conversations about trustworthiness and safety and security and human-centered, rights-respecting. That we're thankfully kind of getting there at the multilateral level. But once we start kind of putting that into practice, I think we start to see the divergence in terms of, what does that mean for any particular country or for any particular region? And that's why we have to continue to kind of have these conversations and not shy away from them and continue to build consensus where we can, and continue to have those debates where they're necessary.
Andrew, I know you spend a lot of time kind of thinking about this bigger picture. Can you talk us through a little bit about what we're seeing?
Yeah, I think I actually saw the Council of Europe had a stat. You're the perfect person to correct me if I'm wrong, which is something like, there's over 450 or so governance initiatives around the world. There's 600 or so AI-related bills being considered just in the United States. It really is hard to track all of it, but I do think there's an advantage to having this sort of layered network approach to governance because expertise resides in different areas, in different sectors. Capacity varies across these issues. AI as a capability really has to manifest itself in a particular context. We need to know exactly how it's being deployed, who's being affected by it, who the users are. So it's helpful to have so many different diverse initiatives underway. I do think there is a sort of harmonization, coordination problem, at least having shared situational awareness around these initiatives. So I do think that's a challenge. And one practical example would be as we think about standards development, technical standards development, as new initiatives or principles are articulated in the Trade and Technology Council or in the Quad or in other fora, what are the implications, for example, for the JTC 21, developing standards for implementation of the EU AI Act. We have to make sure that we're not duplicating or reinventing the wheel, but we also have to be aware of sort of what these developments mean as we flesh out really important initiatives at the international level. A couple of the things I would point out that are really important. One is, how do we make sure that the global majority, that voices from countries around the world are present for these debates, not just as passive recipients of assistance, but as active shapers of the norms, of the technical standards that are guiding the development, deployment of this technology. And I think it's really going to be an important challenge because there are so many different venues with which to engage, and not every country is going to be able to just engage broadly on all of them. This is something I saw within the UN system. This is an area where there are a lot of countries engaging. This is where they may have capacity. How do we think about some of those challenges? The other pieces, you talked about some of the potential sort of fault lines or areas where we have to think about more challenging conversations. What's the role of China in AI governance for all of these different areas that we've been focusing on today? What's the role of AI safety? And it's interesting because sometimes AI safety conversations get folded into governance conversations, but there are very particular concerns on AI safety around assessment and access and verification. And there's a whole sort of set of research literatures around this. So how do we think about getting that right? This is an important set of concerns that builds into AI governance conversations. And the last thing is, how do we maintain agile, forward-looking legislation and governance frameworks? I mean, I found this hard just even writing a book on AI, trying to make it relevant beyond a couple months. And so how do we make sure that as we build out these frameworks, we have the insight, the talent, and the capacity in governments to make sure that we're keeping these flexible and agile so that they can adapt with the times. I think that's going to be an ongoing problem and an ongoing challenge, but so far, we've seen a lot of experimentation across the board, so we can hopefully learn from each other.
How is the experimentation affecting you as a business level? Because if there are different kinds of approaches and different frameworks, and some are more flexible than others, as a company that's trying to work in a lot of different spaces, that must be a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're a company that went from a pretty sleepy research lab to suddenly one of the most closely scrutinized and largest, quote unquote, although we're still quite small, but a global tech company. We went almost overnight. And the amount of, scrutiny and interest and kind of everything we do is dialed up to 11 kind of at all times. Some of that is our own making and some of that comes from the rest of the world. But as our products continue to improve and it's very important to us to continue to be able to ship products that lead on capability and also on safety, but to get them out into the world when we can do so, as safely as possible, because you learn so much more from having something out in the world than you ever could just studying it in the lab. And it is a real challenge as different regulatory frameworks are starting to pop up around the world. Very few of them are directly applicable now. There's obviously, as a former FTC person, I say all the time that there's no exception to the consumer protection laws, et cetera, for AI, and that is certainly true. But these different frameworks and standardization requirements are still relatively nascent as applied to AI. So you see the EU in particular, where the discussions on the code of practice, which are really going to lay out the specifics for what has to happen for general purpose AI model developers launched in the European Union. That practice is just starting. It needs to be completed in the course of 9 months, which is a massive undertaking. And all of the details really still have to get spelled out. And I am very hopeful that that will be able to happen in a way that keeps in mind kind of some of the other standards work that is happening and tries to harmonize with kind of other global frameworks that are creating, because it is, it's a massive challenge, and also makes it harder and harder to deploy products there, as some other companies have already kind of started to point out, that it can be a huge challenge for a company like ours to be able to overcome. We're very optimistic that it's going to go in the right direction in terms of having a lot of advances in kind of common standards that are underway right now at the same time as those discussions are happening. And we're hopeful that they'll kind of happen at the same time.
I'm going to shift a little bit more back to kind of, Andrew alluded to the question of China very briefly, and I thought, Thomas, you might be able to talk a little bit. You spoke about the convention and how it is hopeful to be a global framework for those countries that can commit to protecting democracy and rule of law and human rights, but you referenced that there will be some that can't. What do you think we do about that?
Yeah, this is a good question, and as you may know, the Council of Europe had 47 members until 2 years ago. Now it has 46 because one country was, and things are never black and white, but in this case, one country was so clearly breaching all the fundamental values and also legal instruments of the institution, so that at some point in time there is a credibility, legitimacy issue. And so that means, like, if there are actors that do not play along, at least to some extent, then it's difficult to do something together. On the other hand, and this is, it's actually funny, if on national level we looked at 18 countries and how the government's model is developing, and the purpose is always the same. It's about allowing innovation, progress, and so on. And then it's something along the lines of protecting human rights, democracy, and rule of law in different variations. It's mainly also about creating trust, taking those along that are afraid. And of course, it is obvious that every new technology creates winners and losers in an economy on national level, but also globally between blocks, between powers, between countries. So you have, and you also see this, like, let's say, between Europe and the US, that there is partnership, but there's also competition. She's laughing, because that was also an issue, of course, in the negotiations. What are we actually trying to achieve? Are both sides or both partners trying to achieve the same or not? What I'm trying to say is that it is always a form of cooperation and also competition. And of course, on a geopolitical level, if you have actors that, let's say, where does this idea of a rules-based world order that we've been used to the last 70, 80 years come from? It comes from the fact that, in particular, the Europeans were about to kill themselves very heavily twice in the last century. And then also thanks to the US who supported the Europeans in creating a rules-based world order where you can have, let's say, a peaceful coexistence or a peaceful competition within some limits. The problem is that in the 90s, we thought that this is the end of history, the end of wars, definitely also in Europe. And now we realize that also thanks to ideas about new technology that may actually result in you being the strongest ones. And if you're the strong ones, the strongest one, or you hope you're going to be number one, you have little interest in letting you constrained by rules that would actually support the weaker ones or the smaller ones. What I'm trying to say is that we witnessed in the last 10 years, we've witnessed an increasing ignorance of the rules-based world order globally, but also nationally, actually, it's on all levels. And of course, there is a challenge that if someone thinks that, well, by breaking the rules, I may actually win. I may win power. I may win, I don't know what. That is a challenge. And in that sense, it is something that will learn to cope with, at least for a period of time. We may either face a third world war in some point in time if one party thinks that they are so strong that they may win it. Hopefully we can avoid that. And otherwise we'll have to learn again to come back to a rules-based world order where we have some respect for some rules and we can play within and maybe not cross certain lines. And this is definitely something that, yeah, the visions go in all optimistic and negative, pessimistic directions, but it's something that we need to struggle, and therefore it's already a success that we managed to get this convention done with all its weaknesses that it has, but the fact that we could actually agree on some rules, not knowing who's going to profit more or less from this is an achievement, I think.
I think maybe this is a good segue into the question of what comes next. We've been talking a lot about these very high-level frameworks and the kind of beginning of international cooperation and a little bit about the questions of who might be able to cooperate. But what's the next level of international innovation here? And I think specifically given the audience, what we've been talking about, government use of AI in particular, I think is something to think about. What comes next as we all look at how governments might leverage this technology?
I'm happy, I could jump in here. So it's interesting because if we think about the rules-based order, I think one of the challenges is always felt so abstract to so many people. And how do you make the benefits real? How do you make them diffuse to more people? How do you elevate different voices? So one recent example that we could build on, the Partnership for Global Inclusivity of AI that was agreed with the US, private sector partners, many others at the recent UN meetings. This is an area where they're trying to provide capacity, locally specific data sets, training for countries around the world so that they can spread the benefits of AI. When I step back and look at this, right, and you think, well, how do we convince countries and people around the world that it's worth investing in something that may require sacrifice of short-term interest for long-term gain and broader stability? I do think it's important to go back to a previous point that many people around the world feel that they are authors of some of these rules and standards and not just sort of passively receiving them. And so it's really important, not just on the capacity building side, but on participation, on sort of socio-technical approaches for understanding how AI harms and benefits interact when many of these models get deployed in context perhaps beyond which they were trained for. And to really think about building up digital ecosystems for development around the world. And I think as we focus on government use and on responsible use, this is an opportunity to diffuse best practices in all directions for us to learn and also for countries to really be able to adapt these tools for a great benefit for agriculture, for energy, and for a lot of other positive use cases. The second piece that I would say is really important is, when I look at some of the sort of areas for progress down the road, I think of it in terms of capability, context, risks, and mitigation. And on the capability side, I think there's a lot we could do to provide more transparency and insight. So some of that is on model evaluation. Some of that it might be on whistleblower protection or anonymous reporting. For context, some of this might be incident monitoring, actually tracking globally what's going wrong so we have a better understanding across sectors. There's some nascent efforts at this. I think the OECD, the Partnership on AI, how do we have holistic analysis and public participation in some of this incident tracking? What about AI auditors coming up with a whole new sort of position on AI tools, AI certifications, AI authorities, and then people to audit the auditors. I think this is an ecosystem that could be developed responsibly with cross-sectoral partnerships. On risk management, I think NIST and others have done remarkable work on this in many sectors. For AI, though, this is a space that still needs to be developed and still would benefit from some socio-technical approaches for understanding risks. And on mitigation, one of my colleagues at the Center for Security and Emerging Technology at Georgetown, Dewey Murdoch, he's reflected on things like this. Why is it that, do people have appropriate redress and efficient mechanisms for accountability? What's that path look like for AI? And that can take all sorts of forms. There's lively debates about liability for AI. There's, I think, more we can do to think about what accountability, enforcement, and efficient procedures for redress and protection look like on the technology. Together, I think these sorts of practical initiatives cut across a lot of divergent debates about risks and benefit in the AI communities and could actually really help stimulate trust in the technology and therefore adoption over the long term. And I think the good news is that a lot of this is starting to happen and can be encouraged. But going back, I think, to your good points, the pace of progress is moving very quickly. So if we move into places where AI starts to become more in the sort of agentic AI space, we're taking actions in the physical world, this raises a whole new set of questions about monitoring, incident reporting, the attack surface for potential bad actors to target. So we're gonna have to get through these debates together in an inclusive way, but in a speedy way, because we're gonna have to figure out how to govern this technology responsibly as it diffuses into so many different contexts.
Thanks. Ben, I'm curious, what are the spaces where you think these additional government steps are necessary right now, and what do you think the role is of the private sector in helping shape them?
Yeah, that covered like the whole landscape. There's an enormous amount to unpack there. And look, I think that there is, understandably, there's been a significant focus on the risks of AI over the last year or two. And that should continue, but we should also continue to recognize the enormous benefits that are potential to be realized. Our models, especially some of the new ones that are really focused on reasoning, are capable of solving really hard problems, and that power is only going to get better. Sam Altman has described the O1 preview that just launched as being kind of like GPT-2 in the reasoning space. That, it can do some things really well. It's very specific. Some of the stuff it can do is really impressive, but it's like a baby step. And the path to moving that to something much more powerful, including, I think, to real agentic properties that can, go and work on a task for hours to days to months and do it largely independently, like that is not science fiction. That's the technology is there. It needs to scale, but we're pretty confident that we can get there and probably get there pretty quickly. And the potential benefits from that are enormous. And it's very important, I think, to think of ways that folks don't get left behind, and that while it is really important to think of competitive concerns from places like China and misuse of AI by governments that may not be as scrupulous as others, we've also got to think about how to get this technology into the hands of the world in a way that does let folks realize the benefits while controlling the dual-use nature of it in a sufficient way that the benefits are going to far, outweigh the risks. And I think, international cooperation is going to be key to that. I do think some of the early steps of things like an incident reporting framework. So there's some ideas about having kind of the different global ACs that might connect to sort of a central node that would be able to receive information about incident reporting and maybe feed it back and create some kind of feedback loop. All of these ideas are incredibly nascent, and there's an enormous amount of work to think through what the best structure might be. But international cooperation on those fronts is going to be really important and is going to need to happen quickly.
And Thomas, you talked about how you kind of already are taking these next steps. The hood area conversations are kind of the next level of granularity for the framework. Can you speak a little bit more about where you see these things going?
Yeah, I think that there's probably three elements. One is we've developed hundreds of principles and theoretical instruments on paper. Now we need to make sure that these things work. Even technical standards need to prove that they work at some point in time. And as a small country in the middle of Europe, not being part of the EU, we are trying to find out what do the 35 EU acts on digital. It's not just the A Acts, it's DMA, DSA, and Data Act, Data Governance Act, and what have you. What does this mean for us? So we talk to all the EU member states, and then you realize they are trying to find out what is their way on making these things work. Because they are there on paper, they need to find out, okay, which institutions they have to charge with what, how does this all play together? So making things work that whoever has developed on paper is going to be crucial. And also there, probably mutual learning is important, and also learning from things that may prove not to work as intended. This is one of the elements, and the hood area is just one important bridge that we're trying to build between technical norms and legal norms in order to bring them together in a meaningful way. Another element is that I think we should, also listening to this morning's debate, it's very interesting. In the end, it's like, okay, we have existing norms, we have new challenges, we don't really know how this is going to work. In the end, you end up with education, empowerment, skills. So no matter what you have as regulatory mechanisms, in particular as laws, if nobody understands this, if things are too complex for people to follow, it will not work. So we'll have to find a way to not just think in terms of legal instruments, but also in terms of maybe a new way of governance per se, because if we look at how political decisions are taken nowadays, it is still the same mechanisms that were actually created during the first industrial revolution, when nation states were formed, when you had political parties based on milieus. You had the entrepreneur classes, you had the working class, and then you had something like the Catholic, conservative, farmer, whatever, third party normally. And we are still, and they were developing laws over years, and then in my country you can have, with direct democracy, you can have a referendum after 5 years of a law being worked out, and if people say no, then you go back to square one. So it takes you 10 years to develop a piece of legislation which is simply not workable unless it's on a principle basis like what we did with the convention. But if something is supposed to be specific and agile, this way of working and also taking decisions in milieus, in parties, this is why also things are breaking down in terms of the classical parties. We need to find new ways of representativity, of inclusive participatory decision making, where you have the milieus of today, which are not the same like the ones in the Industrial Revolution, in a way that the solutions are acceptable and that they are more agile, more dynamic. We'll probably need to use AI and other tools in order to develop let's say, beta versions and self-learning legislative tools, like the technology is self-learning and self-developing, because this stable thing, we keep something for 10 years, then we modify it, then we keep it for 10 years, may simply, or is probably working less and less. So that we need to work and be innovative, not just on the technology side, but also on the governance side. And if you want to have peace in the world, I think we have to work on multi-stakeholder processes that are accountable and transparent and inclusive, in a way that people accept the decisions are taken and will not go to take arms to fight against decisions that they are afraid they are losing out. So I think, yeah, we have to innovate on several levels, actually.
So Elizabeth, as we take these innovations on the different levels and we move down a level of granularity, how do you make sure that the big picture ideas of rule of law and human rights and democracy are actually remain protected and part of the conversation as you step down the granularity levels?
I think part of it is what we're doing now, right? Is the scene setting, getting to that basic consensus that these are the things we should be concerned about. We should be concerned about being rights respecting, about safety, about security, about transparency, about privacy. And so once we have that and we start moving down, if that's already embedded in there, obviously, we still have to continue to have those conversations at a deeper level, but it at least gives us, a starting point. And that was one of the things we continued to talk about throughout the convention negotiations, was that this was creating a common baseline that we're all going to build upon. But that it gives us that common language, that common starting point. And it's just a matter of continuing those conversations. And I think that coming down will actually strengthen, right? That will hopefully strengthen transparency, strengthen privacy, strengthen safety, because our conversations will become more detailed, more targeted, more complex. So I don't think I don't have a fear that we'll be losing that overarching framework, those kind of key principles that have been identified. I'm actually optimistic that those lower conversations, more detailed conversations, will just help strengthen them.
Great. Well, I want to remind everybody that there are cards on your tables and you can write down questions. I've already gotten a few. So thank you very much for those who have already provided some questions. I'm going to jump now to some of the audience questions. The first one here is, how are you thinking about inference-heavy AI models like OpenAI's recent models in this kind of frontier AI governance framework? So we've talked a little bit about kind of general AI issues, but now we're delving into more specifics. Maybe I'll let you start, Ben.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, one of the issues that the kind of inference-heavy models raise is something that we've been thinking about a while, with the emphasis on compute as kind of the basis for, a proxy of risk, which largely works right now. Most people agree that it's not perfect, but there's not really anything better to look at. But the potential to have very powerful models that actually use considerably less compute, like certainly at the pre-training stage, I think it really does raise the question that is that proxy going to last for very long, and what is going to replace it? Because right now the answer from everybody is, I don't know. And the risks of, this was one of the things that came up with things like the discussion about the California legislation that Governor Newsom just vetoed, as well as issues that I think come up with the AI Act as well, is that if you're going to kind of encode these thresholds into law, like what happens when you start having, very powerful open source models that cost a lot less to train and that don't use nearly as much compute, but are then kind of completely outside of the framework that has been built up as a regulatory mechanism. That's a really hard problem to solve, for which I think nobody yet knows the answers to. And part of that is the need to just continue to advance the science of how you actually measure capability and risk of these models.
Does anyone else want to jump in on that question?
Maybe a quick thought, which is, I think it's important to focus also on the development ecosystem around these models. I've had one of the gifts of being a teacher is you have a lot of smart students that go into these topics, and I've had a particular student who's been focusing on this, because if you look at some of the algorithmic advances, there's lots of studies on this, but some of the progress we've seen is driven by Moore's law and parallelization and lots of spending, but a lot of it is also algorithmic efficiency, like a lot of brilliant people working on chain of thought and fine-tuning and retrieval augmented generation, all these interesting ideas that then actually end up playing a pretty big role in some of the recent models that we've seen from companies like OpenAI. So this development ecosystem itself is driven by enormous talent. And so we have to pay attention to some of the metrics there as well. I think there's always a risk, like Goodhart's law, if you focus on a metric too long and it becomes your only target, it's not as good a metric anymore. So we have to think about, what we're really trying to measure, and the fact that many of the measurements that we're focused on are not just technical measurements, they're value measurements. They have implicit normative assumptions baked into them. And so it's really important for us to go back, I think, to a point you made, and both of you made, which is that we need sort of broad-based dialogue and inclusive sort of participation on this to have a better understanding of, when we talk about deployment of these models, who are the people using them, what's the context, how are they affected, are their voices part of the debate? I think that actually can feed back into more technical questions about what's worthy of measurement, what we decide is worthy of measurement, and what values that really reflects. Yeah.
I'm going to move on to the next question. And again, if anyone has additional ones, please feel free to write them down. This is for everybody. Do you believe the AI regulatory frameworks that are being discussed today can withstand the competition from AI developed in countries outside of these frameworks? Anyone want to take a first stab, Elizabeth?
Can you ask the end again? Withstand the competition? Can the models themselves withstand?
Yeah, but can the, I think I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. Basically, can compliant AI withstand competition from potentially non-compliant AI when you're thinking about some of these standards and baselines we've been setting?
I definitely think it can. I mean, I think in the end, we will see that AI that is developed in a way that is safe and secure and trustworthy, that is rights respecting, And countries who take that approach, in the end, will be more, the countries themselves will be more self-reliant. They will be themselves more secure, and I think the models will be such that they will serve those positive ends that we want and will avoid, hopefully, some of the risks that folks are concerned about. So I think that what we are all working towards and what we are looking at is not just a AI that is feel good, that we all can be happy about, but I think that is truly has integrity to the process and is something that in the end will be what carries the day.
If I may add, this is also in my country, there's lots of debates also during COVID, like which system is better, our very developed direct democracy that takes very long to take decisions, but once they're taken, they're accepted and carried by the whole or by a large proportion of the society, versus the system where you have a more or less benevolent dictator that can be much faster and take action. And if the problem with the benevolent dictator model is the benevolent in the model. And normally, like, I studied history and economics. Normally, some of the dictators have actually been benevolent or have been fighting against other dictators and trying to do the right thing or thought they did the right thing. But the longer you stay in power, the less you remain benevolent, the less people tend to listen to each other. So I would also tend to believe that a liberal system where you can issue a thesis and somebody else can issue an antithesis, then you have a debate, ideally evidence-based, and then you have a solution where the best solution in terms of substance has a chance to succeed, should continue to have a better efficiency, innovation potential than other systems where this open dialogue is not possible. Hence, the solutions may not be the best ones, but the ones that please, the ones that take decisions. So I would also take this as a shared understanding of our transatlantic cultures, that we do think that within certain limits, the competition of good ideas is leading us most efficiently to progress. Let's put it that way.
Could I reinforce
Yeah,
one part? I was thinking about some of these questions on if there is non-compliance or if there are non-state actors or there are other parties that are outside of these agreements. What's the effect of non-compliance on the authority and the legitimacy of these agreements? It's a very difficult question. In one sense, I feel there's a tempting technical answer, which is, there's very nascent work on verification mechanisms, AI verification mechanisms for treaties. This is an interesting space of sort of more on the scientific side where we could be evolving the science, governments could try to support this and link and convene different communities. I think these are exciting. In the same vein, we think about bad actors misusing AI for disinformation to undermine the integrity of our information environments. Again, there are a whole host of interesting technical solutions at different stages of development, content authenticity tools, watermarking, all these interesting things. But at the root of this, I think, are not technical issues. They're political problems, or they're human problems, or they're analog problems. And so that's I think what makes this so difficult is on the question of AI and disinformation. Yes, we need to be investing in a lot of the technical solutions that will harden these models, make them more fact sensitive, allow better usage policies and communication of risky research. But we also have challenges with polarization and our media environments and support for local journalism and education and critical thinking. And again, going back to this theme we've all been hitting on, the clock speeds are very different for the analog solutions and the technical solutions perhaps. And so I think we have to remember the human element in all of these difficult problems, because one of the challenges as an academic looking at this is it really is true that so many of the positive use cases that we're all trying to nurture have simultaneously, you worry about some of the bad use case coming at us at the exact same time. And so I think this is an area where the technical community is working on this, and the people who are thinking about sort of the analog politics and the geopolitics, have a stake in working together on it, because we can't solve them just on one track alone.
Yeah, I know. I think it's a really great point. I think, look, there's nothing that says that ethically, humane, human-centered, responsible AI models can't outcompete models that are developed in countries that don't abide by those rules. I think they absolutely can. There's no guarantee that they will, however, and I think part of that is the regulatory structures that are created. If they swing too far to slowing down the pace of innovation with a focus only on risks, without also on the concomitant benefits and the investment in the potential infrastructure, modernizing our electrical grid, building data centers, keeping ahead. I mean, all of those things I think are vital to keep the pace of innovation strong. Because I think we can build these models in an incredibly responsible way. It's a touchstone for our lab and certainly other large labs in the United States. But there's no guarantee yet. Nobody has won anything yet. As these evolve, we need to keep that in mind. That it is a really important concern that there is no guarantee that we'll stay ahead perpetually.
Any other questions from the audience? One more coming up. Thank you so much. Thank you. This is the big one. So, what is the international negotiating environment for AI? Like big picture, how would you? I'm gonna riff off of this, unless someone who wrote it wants to step up and add more. But kind of what do you see as the dynamics in these international negotiations? And maybe we could talk about the UN, since that's where everybody sits. But anywhere is fine.
I mean, we were, when UNESCO negotiated in 2021 this recommendation on ethics of AI, we were quite amazed that all UNESCO member states signed up to things like there should be no mass surveillance and what have you. And we were like, okay, fine, it's a non-binding recommendation. So let's say the cost of saying yes to something that has no teeth or only very small teeth is of course limited. And I guess this is also why we may not have something with teeth on a global level, because there's not enough trust between some geopolitical blocs. There's not enough willingness to agree on something and to give it an enforcement mechanism that you can actually force people to comply. I mean, even the Council of Europe Convention, we don't have a police that will chase governments that will not comply. The only thing we have is a conference of the parties, as it will be called, is a mechanism where you monitor yourself. There's an obligation that I didn't mention. There's an obligation to actually report what measures you take as government on yourself, but also how you address the risks of private sector. You need to report, and then the other countries can say, well, we don't think that's enough, we maybe should improve. And also there, like if the countries as a whole care less about rules-based world order, any convention is worth less because it has less teeth. The more serious this is being taken by by a vast majority, the more can you do. So I don't think that there is, in the short term, in the next few years, there will be an agreement on a global scale, like inclusively, also because if one country has one voice and can veto a decision, it's difficult. This is why the Council of Europe instrument that allows to go beyond Europe with like-minded countries that share the same fundamental values and ideas. If you look at the Cybercrime Convention or the Data Protection Convention 108, there are between 50 and 100 countries that have signed it. There's cooperation with more than 150 countries that go in the same direction. And so I think there's a potential for the time being to go with a coalition of willing, knowing you may not have everyone on board. And we did not talk about the military aspects and defense aspects. The Council of Europe has no mandate of this, and many other institutions, OECD and so on. You only have some areas in the UN where you can talk about these things. Knowing that military is a key driver for new technologies, because you don't have to ask for parliamentary okays to put money into new technologies if it's about defense. So this is also something that will somehow hopefully find a way to make sure or minimize the use of new technologies to kill people rather than to improve the conditions of our lives mutually. Let's put it that way.
Does anyone else want to address that question?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo a lot of what Thomas said, and I think that conversations are becoming more inclusive, which is definitely a benefit to all. What that does mean, though, is that the conversations are going to need to be responsive, and I think that's one of the things we saw at the UN with the AI resolution by focusing on sustainable development, which is an area that has, widespread concern, impact, implications, and was something that all countries could relate to in one way or another. And so finding topics, areas like that, where we can build consensus, we can build coalitions, we can be inclusive of nations where this technology may be being developed, and nations where it may not be, and may not be as easily accessible. And the next resolution at the UN was on capacity building. So finding these areas where, even though we may be competitors or we may not, there may be countries that we don't necessarily share all of our same ideas and values, but finding those areas where we can work together, where there are mutual interests, and building upon them, I think, is one of the next important steps.
I mean, as a small note to add, I think all great points is confidence building measures is also a tool in the toolkit, and the tough rhetoric, the competition, the pressures afoot aren't going to disappear. And I think no matter what issues we focus on, all of these competitive pressures find their ways into the nooks and crannies of these negotiations. But we all have an interest in stabilizing some of the competition and making sure that there is greater predictability, to some degree as practical, greater transparency. And there is a set of tools that don't necessarily port perfectly from past eras, but they can help provide some openings for dialogue on those. And I think that there are these sorts of engagements happening, and they have varied degrees of success, but it's important to invest in some of these tools and to refine them for present day concerns, because at the end of the day, there's always a risk that miscalculation, inadvertence, and exuberance around different technologies, especially emerging technologies, can create bad outcomes for people. And we obviously see a lot of the benefits as well. So I think that those are important tools as well to think about.
Any last thoughts?
I don't have much to add. I think my colleagues on the panel are far more familiar with the international dynamics in that regard than I am. So,
I just would like to add one more thing. I think also, given the competition between different geopolitical blocs, also about those who do not want to put themselves clearly in one camp for different reasons, I think we also need to think about what can we offer those that we want to rather convince of our ways of looking things, or than alternative, let's say, governance visions. And I think if the ones in the middle just basically have the feeling that they can choose between two evils or two alternatives that only care about themselves and try to extract and exploit resources and markets, whatever they can, this is not necessarily the right attitude. I think we have to also think about what are the needs of countries in Africa or Latin America. How can we help them meet their needs? How can we help them also maybe catch up or move to next levels and solve issues so that they feel treated as partners rather than as a means to make more money, for instance, for our industries. And I think this is also something that they are not stupid. They are very sensitive, in particular the ones that have been colonialized by European countries for decades or centuries. And they are very sensitive on how they are treated, how they are looked at. And I think this is something that if we want to continue to, let's say, be leaders in a respectful and free societies, we also need to make sure that we come across as taking others seriously and taking others, accepting others and supporting others in a way that they like feel as partners and not just as used to get them on one side of the table and not on the other.
I think that that's a good point to end on. Unless there's any other additional questions, I want to say thank you all for a really helpful and robust discussion. I certainly feel informed about the international debate and excited about what's coming next if we still have some outstanding questions about who's going to win.
Maybe just to echo Thomas's point, one of the things I learned is when I worked at the UN was don't appear with former colonial masters. That always went over badly. And unfortunately, there are a lot of them. And to what's the angle? I don't know what you found, but what I found, the angle that people were interested in is development. I mean, a large Latin American country, not Brazil, said, don't talk to me about war with China. Talk to me about how my economy can be grown. So I think those are useful points. And it's true across issues for this. But I think we should have our next speaker, actually our second to last speaker. Great. Jack. Good seeing you. Thank you, Dennis. Good seeing you. Thanks. Our final keynote of the day is Jackie McGuire, Executive Assistant Director of the Science and Technology Branch and Chief AI Officer, Federal Bureau of Investigation. So, Jackie, oh, there you go. Come on up. Sure.
Good afternoon. It's quite an entrance, I know. Well, thank you again. As Jim said, my name is Jacqueline McGuire, and I am currently the Executive Assistant Director for the FBI Science and Technology Branch. And I want to thank everyone who put together today's event and thank everyone who has participated and spoken and shared their thoughts. And most of all, thank all of you, both here presently and physically, and those online for taking the time and spending your important time hearing about this important topic. Integrating artificial intelligence and really any emerging technology into the law enforcement space is truly a team effort. And I appreciate everyone's contributions as we move forward with this effort. As the leader of the Science and Technology Branch, I oversee and have responsibility for the FBI's Criminal Justice Information Services, or CJIS division, our Operational Technology Division, and the FBI Laboratory. And sitting at the intersection of emerging technology and our FBI operations, it's also a natural fit for me to serve as the FBI's Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer. And I work in close partnership with our Chief Information Officer, as well as our Chief Privacy and Civil Liberties Officer and operational leaders across the Bureau. For the Bureau, and for most all of us, artificial intelligence is a relatively new and fluid challenge, but adapting to challenges is certainly nothing new for us at the FBI. Over our 116-year history, the FBI has seen numerous events and technological advances that have required us to reassess and change how we go about our business. Just in this century, we have all seen explosions in the amount of digital evidence that we deal in, the use of smartphones and encrypted communications, proliferation of technology like doorbell cameras and other Internet of Things items, and advancements in wireless data capabilities from 5G telecommunications. While we still have a lot of work to do, especially related to encryption and the growing and persistent lawful access challenge, we've adapted and we've innovated to find ways to keep fulfilling our mission to keep American people safe. Years ago, I experienced firsthand the Bureau's ability to reinvent itself and adapt to a new reality as part of perhaps the Bureau's largest investigative challenge. As a relatively young and new agent, I was a case agent on the 9/11 investigation, and I saw firsthand the need for the Bureau to address a new reality. And as we've all seen, the FBI has adapted and evolved to counter the terrorist threat since that time. While the FBI's 9/11 and AI challenges are vastly different, they both have and will continue to change how we go about our day-to-day work in countless ways. The FBI's challenge is not as simple with AI as it is in adapting to new tradecraft, however. It is a multifaceted challenge that must be addressed simultaneously. And as complex as that sounds, our approach is still rooted in one principle, our mission. First and foremost, each and every day, our mission is to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution. As to our approach to AI at the FBI, we're focused first in anticipating and defending against those who are using AI to commit crimes or harm our national security. Second, we're focused on defending the innovators who are building the next generation of technology here in the US from those who want to steal it. And third, we're assessing and developing and deploying AI tools that can enable us to keep the American people safe by doing our job better. And I deliberately listed this point third because the FBI's work still requires humans on the ground within our American communities and around the world to combat threats. And there's no substitute for a workforce who is committed to doing the right thing in the right way. The FBI is built on innovation. We've been innovating for our 116-year history. And the challenge now here is how to use AI tools as a force multiplier to better enable our folks to carry out our mission. When talking about how our adversaries are embracing AI tools, this is a particularly difficult challenge for law enforcement because, as we know, it's constantly changing. Well, it's hard to believe the rapid pace at which AI models are improving. It's also that same rapid pace that is enabling criminals because they could adapt new capabilities as they become available without guidelines or legal guardrails, and we must keep up with them. Models that require lots of sampled media, specialized skills, and months of effort, using hard-to-get hardware to create a deep fake a couple of years ago, have evolved into commercially available capabilities that make it easy for anyone to create a believable audio deep fake in real time with only a few seconds of sampled media. One pervasive and truthfully disgusting AI-enabled use case we're seeing spread across the country now is the generation of synthetic child sexual abuse material, or CSAM. And I know this topic has already been mentioned today because it is clearly one of the most pervasive threats that AI poses to young people. Synthetic CSAM is a threat that must be vigorously pursued wherever it is found, and I commend the work of the folks on the front lines of this, from the criminal division to the Western District of Wisconsin to the Western District of North Carolina, and everywhere where this material is being found. The use of synthetic material by criminals is occurring in many other ways as well, in virtual kidnappings and other extortion attempts, in efforts to impact elections worldwide, and even in efforts to embarrass celebrities, bosses, and others with shocking but false media. This is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of ways AI is being used for nefarious purposes. And as our FBI Director Ray stated last month, it's making junior varsity criminals into varsity athletes, and doing so across almost every flavor of criminal activity. It would be naive of us to think that criminals wouldn't take advantage of AI wherever they can. It would also be naive to think that AI-related threats coming from nation-state actors don't extend far beyond merely their use of AI to further their own interests. Nation-state AI threats also extend to their efforts to harm US interest in AI itself, and that's another key challenge for us at the FBI. The United States has long been home to the world's hottest incubator of AI innovation. Last year, about 75% of the notable AI foundation models, including large language models, were developed here in America. US also leads the world in development of hardware components essential to AI model development and operation, including GPUs. It's obvious that America's lead in AI investment and development is the envy of the world and a prime target for any country seeking to get a leg up in this pivotal race. As we know, China and Russia and Iran are active players in this effort. They want our technology and they want our information. They seek to steal and manipulate it to advance their interest, and failing that, to render them unusable in advancing our interests. And it goes without saying that the interests of these nation states do not align with our interests, our businesses, our national security, and our democracy. It's the playbook that the government of China has deployed against every cutting-edge industry in America. And as AI spreads to companies large and small that adopt AI for pharmaceuticals, engineering, manufacturing, healthcare, you name it, China's gaze will not just be on our AI private sector. They'll be looking to steal technology and sabotage our businesses across the board, just as they have tried to do across the technology spectrum. At its core, the efforts of China, Russia, and others amount to espionage, including economic espionage, influence operations, and traditional spycraft. Countering the espionage activities of other nations within the territorial jurisdiction of the U.S. has long been a key component of the FBI's mission, and AI is a new front in that conflict. The FBI will continue to work vigorously to protect American innovation in AI by identifying, deterring, and preventing the actions of those seeking to steal U.S. intellectual property or unlawfully undermine our capabilities. At the FBI, we're also thinking about the application of AI more broadly by using our wealth of historical information to help us respond more quickly and keep Americans safe. One AI use case we've already adopted enhances the FBI's ability to action tips received from the public in our National Threat Operations Center, or NTOC. The FBI receives thousands of tips a day, and as these tips come in, each one is assessed by trained individuals at NTOC to determine if there is a threat to life or indication of a crime. If so, we'll designate that tip as needing further assessment or route it for investigative action at one of our field offices or for referral to one of our state or local law enforcement partners. We've been able to use an AI model to analyze electronic tips and synopses of phone calls to help the individual assessing the tip quickly triage it, to make us more efficient, and to flag indicators, something that AI is uniquely suited to do because of its ability to digest large volumes of data. And so while we continue to have a human individually assess every tip, AI can help our teams be better at their jobs and continue to keep Americans safe by helping to prioritize our workload, and more importantly, by flagging tips for re-review if they appear to have been actioned differently than other similar tips, thereby further limiting the potential that we miss an important piece of information. We're also continuing to think more broadly about how AI can be used in other ways to protect the American people, whether it's to enhance the ability of our cyber personnel to identify intrusions earlier, to find patterns, or to make connections indicating that something is off, to triage the large volume of data that we have in our systems quickly and efficiently, or even to use AI to aid our human translators to efficiently make sense of intelligence we receive in foreign languages. AI is helping our best and our brightest work smarter and quicker to help solve some of the most pressing challenges that we all face. Of course, at the same time, we're very proud that we have guardrails in place in our use of AI and other emerging technologies in investigations and operations, and these are the same parameters that the bad guys will happily throw out the window. Whenever we think about the potential application of AI at the FBI, we are required to ensure that any such application must operate within the bounds of the Constitution and the law, but also within the public's expectation of how the FBI should act. And along those same lines, I cannot emphasize enough that effective governance of the FBI's use of AI is directly linked to the responsible and continued use of technology in our operations. In a constantly evolving regulatory environment, we've seen no less than 3 executive orders, multiple pieces of legislation, an OMB memorandum, National Security Memorandum, and countless other policy and guidance documents informing best practices and requirements of responsible AI governance. Ensuring those processes continue to keep up with this changing landscape has been no easy task. And I commend the work of the FBI's OCIO and Jonathan Mayer, my counterpart in AI at the department. And I thank them for their partnership as we tackle this complex issue. Additional AI governance requirements will no doubt come down. We remain aware of the international landscape as well and its potential to have a privacy impact on AI in the United States, much like the European General Data Protection Regulation had on data privacy and security. Whatever the new requirement is, we are prepared to integrate them as well, thanks to the collaborative DOJ-wide approach to governance. I hope today's conference spurs numerous continued discussions as we together address the AI challenge. And to that end, as we move ahead, I ask you to keep three things in mind. First, we must stay grounded and avoid the so-called hype cycle of AI. By that I mean we must stay up to date as AI develops. We must maintain our awareness of both its capabilities and vulnerabilities as we continue to evaluate how it impacts our operations. We must maintain awareness of what AI can do, but more importantly, what it isn't well suited to do. By staying clear-eyed, we are better prepared to evaluate and adopt mission-enhancing capabilities and avoid pursuing ill-suited tools simply because they're the latest shiny object in tech. Second, we must not become scared or bogged down by the complexity and pace of change when considering use of AI tools. If implemented appropriately, there is enormous potential to use AI as that mission-enhancing technology. From organizing and sorting through volumes of records in a white-collar criminal case, to finding the proverbial needle in a haystack when we're reviewing petabytes of CCTV video collected after a major incident. AI has the real potential to enhance our limited resources by providing the information that enables us to do what the public expects, to hold the bad actors accountable and to protect the public. Doing this requires a reasonable approach that embraces the technology, but also establishes those guardrails and other effective governance processes to assure AI is providing a defensible service to the mission and not endangering the mission. Finally, third, in this race to adapt to how our adversaries are using AI, we must do our best to not get lapped by the technology. We must ensure we have the investigative and forensic tools to understand and explain the criminal use of AI. From analysis of suspected deep fake videos to develop clues regarding provenance, to intelligence regarding the tactics, techniques, and procedures of criminals as they maliciously use AI, knowledge is power. And our collective knowledge here will aid not only the FBI, but the entire law enforcement community. Because we at the FBI know we are not the only ones playing a key role here. We share the task with every one of you across the department, as well as with our law enforcement, national security, and private sector partners here across the United States and around the world. With the technology evolving as fast as AI, success in this space requires that we all work together. We need to be persistent as we continue to share information on new AI capabilities, as well as adversary tactics and tradecraft, so we could all responsibly implement AI to enhance our mission, as well as to understand and undermine how those bad actors are using AI in their criminal activities. We need to be persistent as we continue to share information with private sector AI companies so that they can implement controls in their services to ensure that bad actors can't use their products to victimize others. We need to be persistent as we continue to share what we're learning with the American public so that they know what to look out for and how best to help protect themselves. When it comes to the evolution of AI and our collective AI challenge, as we seek to use the technology for good and stop those who seek to use it for bad, I think of the words of Winston Churchill, who once said, "This is not the end, It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning. The evolution of AI as technology, of AI as a criminal tool, and of AI as a critical national security asset is a challenge we really are just beginning to address. And together we will continue to adapt as it develops and changes. And while this may be the end of the beginning, I look forward to continuing the journey with all of you. Thank you. Thanks.
I can't resist. I have one apocryphal story, which is a Chinese friend told me that, there was this book a few years ago, China AI Superpower. And the apocryphal story is a senior Chinese political official called the author and said, hey, I thought we were going to be the superpower. You said that. Why did the Americans invent ChatGPT and not us? I don't know if it's true, but it sounds good. I had two goals in doing this. Three if you include doing a favor to CSIS, but goal number one was I was interested in learning what was up with governance, with civil liberties and civil rights, and with facial recognition. The second goal was pull the curtain back a little on what DOJ and FBI are doing, and I personally found it very reassuring to hear this. Everyone makes their own decisions, but this is a valuable tool. We're using it in a responsible way. So that was exceptionally, I achieved my goals. I hope you did too. We have two sets of closing remarks. First is Naveen Shankar, former senior official of commerce, now the president of CSIS's new Economic and Security Department. The second is Michael Stawaz, the progenitor, can I say that? The guy who came up with the idea for this conference. And we'll let them close us out. But Naveen, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Naveen Girishankar. I'm the president of the newly formed Economic Security and Technology Department here at CSIS. Absolutely thrilled that we were able to host this symposium here and, commend Jim Lewis and his team, Julia and Taylor, for putting this together, as well as our colleagues at DOJ. I was fortunate just to come in and listen to Jacqueline's comments, which were both inspiring in terms of the possibilities, but also daunting in terms of the challenges, and really quite eloquent. Want to thank her for coming and sharing her thoughts. I think today was quite an exceptional day. Let me just say this, that the department that I'm heading has a singular mission, which is to ensure that the U.S. and its allies maintain their technology and economic advantages so that it will drive both long-term prosperity, but importantly, the security of our democracies and markets, as well as the resilience of our societies to shocks like climate change and pandemics. So today's event is really central to the type of thing you will hopefully see more of from CSIS. And with that, I would like to thank a lot of folks who spoke today. Nicole Argentieri for her leadership on law enforcement this morning. Obviously, Representative Beyer, who's passionate about both the legislative agenda, but importantly, his own personal experience about folks who maybe, like myself, are on the other side of 50 and what we can do to stay ahead and really be aware of what the new technology means for us. Thomas Schneider, chair of the Convention on AI at the Council of Europe. Obviously, Jacqueline today as well. I'm not going to try and summarize what people have said today, but lots of really important takeaways, both in terms of what criminals are doing using AI, but the importance of law enforcement staying ahead of the curve. We heard a lot about that. Importantly, I think the issues around governance that we've talked about are going to be something that we take away from this in terms of our own research and work. And obviously the need to balance both technological innovation with privacy and the civil liberties that are essential to our democracy. So without further ado, I'm going to pass on to Mick Stawaz, who has been central to making this happen, and really want to thank you, Mick, for your inspiration for actually making this happen. And hopefully this will be the first of many conversations. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I have to really appreciate that all of the speakers stayed on time. I will try and do the same, but they had the benefit of being able to prepare their remarks before today and being up here, and I didn't. So if I had more time, I would be shorter, but I did want to sort of share some of the takeaways. I think the first one is pretty obvious. Life moves pretty fast. That's from the great philosopher Ferris Bueller. I think if he were with us today, he would say AI moves even faster. But we definitely heard about the need to collaborate and to take advantage of so many different areas of expertise. We certainly did that today. I can't remember seeing the department put so many officials from different parts of what we do at a public event like this. I mean, we heard from prosecutors, from investigators, from consumer protectors, civil rights enforcers, policy officials. We had our privacy and civil liberties officer here, as well as the National Security Division. So you really heard from a wide swath. I know Congressman Beyer wished we also had the antitrust division here, but I think OpenAI might have been happy we didn't. But while we certainly wanted to share some of our thoughts with you, we obviously also very much wanted to learn from you all as well. And so we really appreciate our colleagues from the State Department, from the legislative branch, our European counterparts, as well as thought leaders from the research community, from academia, from industry, and from civil society. Everybody has a role to play, and I was happy they were all willing to participate with us here today. Obviously, taking us back to the start of the day, we started with the head of the criminal division sharing two big announcements. The first, the new strategic vision for combating cybercrime at the department. That's going to be available at cybercrime.gov. But I specifically wanted to also make note of the fact that she's also inviting you all to continue this discussion, particularly our efforts to try and enable resilience and research. And we want to hear from you on that. Please do take a look at cybercrime.gov in the near future when we roll out events that are going to hopefully inform further discussions about how we can best enable the research that benefits all of what we want from this important technology. The other thing I wanted to just take a minute to acknowledge is we heard from so many people with different backgrounds addressing different topics, and yet we heard many of the same common themes. It's still early. Maybe it's the end of the beginning. It might not even be the middle of the beginning for a technology this large and impactful. But we can't wait. We need to skate to where the puck is going, a reference that I know my chief very much appreciated as a hockey fan. And I was really heartened to hear Congressman Beyer share that, in fact, they have learned in the legislative branch from past experience with transformational technology, and they are being proactive in considering it and doing it on a bipartisan basis. I hope you heard today that we're doing the same. We are not waiting for new laws to be invented. We are applying the laws that exist. We have no law of the horse, but we have many laws of general applicability, and we are eager to enforce them in new contexts. I also thought that it was really important to hear the balance today. We heard a lot about the risks because there are a lot of risks and we need to address them, but we also had some uplifting examples of how this technology can really help people, including help the department, as long as we use it in a responsible way. Thank you, Jim, for being impressed with the presentations. I was as well in the governance that's going into making sure that these powerful technologies are being used, because as Peter Wynn said, we can't afford not to use them, but being used in a responsible way. So I also heard the need for flexibility so that we don't have lock-in at this early stage, but the need to continue to talk with our partners, not only in the interagency, not even just across the US government, but around the world, to set rules that will benefit us all and contain those risks that we can for the technology. So with that, I turn to our appreciation to CSIS. This is our second symposium with CSIS, and it's been an incredible partnership. This one has run flawlessly, start to finish. No small part to the effort put in by all those involved at CSIS, but also from Paul Zeb. Paul, where are you? Paul Zeb, our cyber fellow, who really quarterbacked this entire thing and put it together. Thank you, Paul, for all the work that went into making this happen. I want to thank CSIP's leadership. They don't have to allow us to do this, and yet they support this extra sort of mission in order to make sure that the public is informed about the topics that we're covering. And so thank you to you, John, and to James. And I want to end by saying we really owe a debt of gratitude to Leonard Bailey, who's had the idea years ago that the public would benefit from hearing directly from the department, engaged with people with different points of view, and it would increase public confidence in our work. So Leonard, as the person who is the true progenitor of this symposium series, thank you. And with that, thank you all for coming.